Yeah, hello and good afternoon, everybody. Well, to this presentation. Well, in about 45 minutes, I will talk a little bit on the motivation of this webinar. The content will be visibility in general, in parts, assemblies, and drawings. And well, first of all, the basics of the visibility, and more more deeply then how the kind of new bodies functionality that came in with Creo 7 impacts all this visibility stuff. From there, I will take a look on the deep dive into the techniques that Creo offers to control visibility. And finally, I will show up with my personal visibility strategy, how I use this, and this I will show in a short live demo. And finally, I'll give a short summary and outlook to the part 2 that will follow in a few minutes then. And it will mainly have a few real-world scenarios, including the body functionality and a little more on live demos then. Okay, that's the content. And I'm starting with my motivation for this webinar. Well, in general, model-based definition is one of my favorite topics, and it's a reason why I'm looking at this visibility topic at all, because in a MBD world, models need to get a lot more attention than in a drawing-based world, and it just requires a clean and a tidy model. Second part is the collaboration point. Well, if you're working in a team, it's nice and kind of necessary that everybody has the same understanding of visibility of things and uses the same mechanisms. And more exact to the current driver of this webinar is the multi-body functionality. What I said came in with Creo 7, and it actually did impact the existing visibility mechanisms a bit. The title I gave this this webinar is kind of a historic thing. I gave this presentation on multiple PTC user events. I think it's more than 10 years ago with the same content, but by then a lot of functions have entered Creo, and so I thought I could remaster the same presentation with the new content. Okay, so let's dive in to the very basics of Creo visibility topic. And the first rule, and it is valid all the time: if any item is invisible, all its sub-items are invisible too. With this, I built up a kind of a picture here where you can see the different levels of visibility that exist in Creo. So on the very top, you have the assembly container that contains the component or even parts embedded components with Creo 8. And there is a new level of visibility living in a part. It's the body level. And the body itself, it contains geometrical features, and these features contain geom elements. But besides the body, you have the supplemental geometry features with the respective elements, the annotation features with the annotation elements, and also a very new function as that an annotation element can live in the part directly without having any feature container. Yeah. So from there, I just want to have a look at and explain the difference between a feature and a geometry element. So this is kind of easy to explain, for example, with an external copy geom feature, because if I talk to you and, well, look at this external copy geom feature, you wouldn't know what it's looking like. So what you're seeing in the graphics area are the geometry elements, are the kilts, the curves, datum curves, and so on. Same is for sketches. In the model tree, you see the sketch, and the graphics, you see the curves, the lines of it. Even better with the annotation features, well, you have the annotation feature as a container and multiple annotation elements in it. And finally, even a radius is a container with a surface that you see in the graphics. Well, the graphics window shows the elements, and the features are the containers shown in the model tree. When we want to look at the categories, what we are looking at, so we are having kind of three geometry categories that we want to control in parts, assemblies, and drawings. That's first the geometries, so the bodies, from the extrudes, the cuts, the holes, the rounds, chamfers, and so on. Supplemental geometry like datum planes, sketches, kilts, axes, datum points, coordinate systems, and so forth. And finally, the annotations like notes, dimensions, GD&T, surface finishes, and so on. Yeah, looking a little more deeply into the geometry, and in there we have to distinguish between parts and assemblies. So in parts, you can suppress features. Well, this regenerates the model, but it blanks the geometry, and it suppresses the the children as well. Or you can use the layers. In this case, hiding or showing bodies with a right mouse button or mini toolbar. Well, this is a layer operation in the background. I'll talk about this later as well. And in the assemblies, you have different mechanisms, like the style states as the most favorite. I have simplified representations, again, layers. You can hide and show components with the right mouse button, and this is also a layer operation. And of course, you can suppress components as well, including a regeneration of the assembly. For the supplemental geometry, you don't have to distinguish, so it's all the same. Layers is the most favorite mechanism to control the supplemental geometry. You can do it with combined states. You can suppress these features. And of course, you can use the display settings in your little in-graphics toolbar. That's not supporting sketches and kilts, and it's temporary. And if you look at the annotations, it's also the same for parts and assemblies. Most favorite mechanism is to control those through combined states. But if you don't using that, you can use layers as well. And finally, yes, you can suppress annotation features with the regeneration later on. Okay, so if I order these control techniques in a different way, I can distinguish between those that are persistent in the model or that are temporary. So persistent ones are, when I start here from the assembly mechanisms, it's the style states that you will find in the view manager, same as the simplified representations, also in assembly mode. Simp reps from part mode are different and don't really help controlling the visibility. Well, layer states, well, in brackets, layers are also in the view manager. And finally, the combined states are combining all the view states all together. The temporary ones are the display settings that I already said. Those are session dependent, and you cannot store those with your part. So if somebody else opens the part, he will see different appearances than you thought you have stored it. And of course, the hiding, showing via right mouse button is kind of temporary. So it's a layer operation. And if you just have hidden a component, for example, saved the assembly and reopened it, you may have noticed that the component is back again. So if you want to make this persistent, you have to save the layer state. Yeah, let's look at these techniques a little bit more in detail. The style states in assembly mode are controlling the components visibility. You can fill them by rules if you like. It's not so well known, this functionality, but it's nice because you can not only say, well, it's blanked or it's visible. You can define the style that the component shall take, like a shaded mode, hidden line, transparent. So you can use one of those. And I personally like that you can promote these style states to upper assembly levels, so you can reuse those settings in your main assembly. Very similar, the simplified representations, they're also in assembly mode. They can also be managed by rules. Well, it's a little bit different user interface. And the main difference is you can make things visible or invisible. You don't have the ability to say, well, it should be shaded or hidden line or so. That's not possible in here. Originally, this function was not designed for controlling visibility. It was designed for managing the used disk space. And again, this can be promoted to upper assembly levels. The next technique is the combined states. I don't really remember when the combined states came into Creo. I think it was someone in the early Wildfire session versions. With combined states, you now can control annotations and, if you like, supplemental geometry. So this is in the lower area of the definition box of a combined state. You see the visibility area, and by default, the checked for annotations and not for supplemental geometry. That's called semi-MBD, the middle row here. And you can see all the annotations in the detail tree that you have added to the combined state. If you uncheck the annotations, you go to the non-MBD state, and that means that all the layers, all the annotations are controlled via layers. Or you can check the supplemental geometry, and then you can add items to your combined states, even datum planes, axes, or curves. But you have to take a few considerations on here. You cannot control quilts through the combined states, so that still leaves them uncovered. And adding items to combined states is a manual task. It's like showing dimensions in a drawing. I just put up here a few config options that may be of interest here. You can set the default for the combined state type with the first one. The second one is about if these combined state tabs are visible in every ribbon area. By default, it's only in the annotate tab where you can see the tabs of the combined views. And the final one is the scope. If you want to see annotations from part level in assembly mode, you have to switch this option to all. Yeah, and then I'm coming to the main part, the layers, because it's the oldest and the most widely used mechanism to control visibilities. And with layers, you can control geometry and supplemental geometry. Okay, well, you can do annotations as well. But for my use case, I don't do this. And it's available in assemblies, parts, drawings, any kind of Creo Parametric objects. And you can control kills. I believe everybody has seen the layer tree already, so I just want to take a little bit deeper look into the different types of layers that there are. And the first one, and yeah, the most powerful ones are the built-in layers. I sometimes call them super layers, and these are the ones that are called hidden items or shown items. The next thing is a very regular layer. It's usually created and items are added by user interaction, so a user can add and remove items manually. Next one are the rule-based layers. They're Creo adds item by rules automatically to this layer. Not so well known, I believe, is nested layers. So you can put a layer on a layer, and this makes sense if you want to control multiple layers at one time. And I believe everybody has seen this. Collated layers are used in assemblies or drawings, and it's a grouping of layers of the same name. Just a few words to these super layers. Well, the hidden items and the shown items, they are collecting the features that you control with the right mouse button or the mini toolbar with hiding and showing elements. As I already said, this is not persistent unless you're saving this status. And this is kind of tricky because if you're in your layer tree and use right mouse button, there's two commands that you could use. It's either save or save status. And for this case, you need to hit the save button. Don't use the save status. That's for a different purpose. Yeah, well, these two layers are always on the top of the tree and they cannot be deleted by a user. And well, advantage, disadvantage, I don't know. It's individual for every layer state. So if you hide items, save the status for this state, the next layer state has a different state again. Yeah, well, layer creation. How come these layers into a model? Well, the most common mechanisms is template files. Everybody's using template files, and usually they are containing layers. But you also can use add-on applications like the Smart Update to add or manipulate layers automatically. And of course, you can create layers manually. Hard task, I say, or you can use a quite historic mechanism. That's an option, a config pro option, dev layer, that if you create an item of a specific type, Creo will create a layer automatically for it. Yeah, and the last thing here is, and I believe it's the most difficult part of the layers. It's the display status. And in most cases, or with most people I speak, they're using the display status options shown on hidden only. But there is a third option that's called isolated. And I thought I could kind of illustrate how this works. Well, let's put on the light on my Creo screen with multiple items in there, and they are all visible right now. You can imagine them as datum planes, for example, for better imagination. Now let's create a layer and put the 5 items on this layer. It's a new layer, and new layers are initially shown. So nothing has changed on my display, and I create another layer that's also shown and nothing changed in my display so far. Now I'm hiding this layer and I see that 5 of my items get invisible. And so for the intersection thing here, you see that the hidden layer is more powerful than the shown layer. So that's so far so good. So let's just create another one. Initially, this layer is again shown and nothing changes to my display so far. But now I'm isolating this layer and a lot changes on my display. So besides those items that are not on a layer at all, everything else is invisible. Only the items on my isolated layer are visible. That's fantastic. And if you're understanding the the order of these 3 display status options, it's kind of easy to understand, but you still have to be a little bit, take a little bit of caution, because the main rule number 1 still applies. You have these different levels. And if you're blanking a feature, you can isolate a layer with a lot of elements on it and they won't show up because you're working on a different level. So that's always to keep in mind, very important. Okay, so that's about the layers, and from the layers, just a few words to layer states. A layer state is a snapshot of the current layer visibility status. Well, and the snapshot, well, it's not really nice, because if you're creating a new layer after you took the snapshot, it's not controlled in this status. So you have to update the status regularly to get on the latest situation and control things reliably. Yeah, and you can use these layer states in combined states for layer control. This is what we'll see in a minute. Let's just have a look on how these visibility states and layers from a part work downstream in a 2D drawing, an assembly, or even Creo view. Let's take a 2D drawing first. So if you create a new drawing, you first probably will create a view, and a window pops up. Select a combined state. If you're selecting no combined state, the view will be created drawing dependent, and the layer status from the drawing will take control. If you create a view with a selected combined state, the layers that you're having later on are independent from the drawing and only reflect the current view. The advantage is the layer state is copied from the model, and you initially don't have to worry about it anymore. So you get the correct visibility. Another config option here, just information that's dealing with new layers and models. Came up with Creo 7. Yeah, when you're in a 2D drawing, there's a few settings that you need to be aware of. And the first one is, does the model has the control over the layers, or has the drawing the control over the layers? And there's 3 options. No means, well, model has control. Yes means drawing has control, partly. And all means drawing has control. All, and the difference is the super layers. So it's also controlling the super layers there. But there's another level to take care of. It's the drawing versus the view control. And if you are in the layer tree and in the drawing, you can hit this little arrow next to the object. And if you're looking in your graphics area, the views get either a brown or a green boundary Brown means, well, this is drawing dependent. Green means this is drawing independent. It's only the view. An example for this we'll see in the second part of this webinar. In an assembly mode, you see hopefully the colored layers. That means your model tree is nicely structured, but you have to make sure that you have a look at the setting. If you go to no submodel layers, then it's the display to the very right here. And you see this is what I have as the layers in my assembly. Not very many are used by putting items on it, but they're just necessary to be there because you only can control a layer in an assembly if you have a layer in there. And if you don't have those, you cannot control any layer from a model in your assembly at all. Yeah, and finally, Creo view as a downstream item. Well, combined states convert to Creo view nicely. You even can turn off and on bodies manually there. So it's new with Creo 7. And if you want to control layers manually in Creo view, you have to use the MCut option. So that's not available in the Express option. But for my case, it wasn't really necessary so far because I'm using these layer states, and you can control the combined states in Creo view as well. Keep in mind to turn on the respective Creo view filters to display all the items that you want to see, because if you don't do this, you don't see the items. Okay. Yeah, well, a lot of information, and you can ask yourself, well, how do you manage all this? Do you need a strategy for this, or how do you do this? And yes, I think it's nice to have a strategy here, and I just want to talk a lot about how I'm seeing this a little bit more in detail. Well, a main principle for me is I'm controlling annotations, either in assemblies and parts, through combined states only. So I'm not putting any annotation on a layer. Same with components in assemblies. I'm handling components and visibility of components by style states or simpreps, and I'm not using layers for that. But bodies, kilts, and supplemental geometry, I'm using layers for this to control the visibility. And well, in the first place, I'm trying to use the feature level for visibility. There's some exceptions, but I'm talking about this a little later. Yeah, when creating all this and strategy many years ago, I collected a lot of feedback from customers, users, co-workers, friends, and I structured this a little bit into these 4 bullet points. The first thing is, well, most people don't want to do layer operations at all. They want to have this layer thing in the background and prefer to directly switch between visibility status. Next point is, if you want to make an item visible and select a layer or whatever and say make visible, you want to see the items and not looking for why are they not visible right now. And I want that coworkers can use my model from the very beginning and not just starting with deleting all the layers first and then putting new layers in. So that happened a lot. And next, I want to have my model clean and comprehensible. I don't like if I open a model to see a lot of supplemental geometry, a lot of kilt sketches and whatever. When I open a model, I want to see the clean geometry. On the other hand, if I create a new feature, I want to see it. And I don't want it that it's disappearing immediately. And even better, if everything's working for the same for all models. Yeah, and finally for myself, I like to have some icons or map keys that's supporting my workflow and gives me less manual work in here. Yeah, with this, I put on my main principles that I'm using here. First thing, I have to put everything on a layer that I want to control. My initial state is all layers are hidden. So I have a blank Creo screen. And if I want to see things, I isolate a layer on demand. And preferably, I'm using layer states for that. In a model tree, I've thought about a little of a structure, and I'm using layers for my states, starting with 3 numbers. That's states for working and documentation purposes. User layers so that I create on the fly or manually are starting with a letter, and usually they sort into the model tree just under this headline layer. And finally, the type-specific layers starting with an underscore, and they are rule-based and they're collecting the items by type automatically. Yeah, and with this, I started to create a few states. Well, my first state is called model, and it's intended to be the initial state at retrieval for parts and assemblies. And this is how you do this in the layer tree. If you say save status, then this status is the saved status that gets opened on retrieval. In my case, I'm collecting all the bodies by rule for this, so they are visible initially, but I can add any kind of curve, kills, logos to this layer to bring them up initially from the very beginning. My next state is my working state, and I make usually visible the geometry, sure, my basic datums from the start part, and I want to see all the new features that I have in my model. And for that, I'm having a mechanism. I have another layer that's called Work Automatic, and this layer collects all new features. It's not associative, so if I clean this layer, it's not collecting back all the features. And I have a regular layer for the user that he can add items manually on his choice. And the next one or final one here is my drawing layer. So this is a state where I prepare the visibility of my part in a related 2D drawing. Right now I'm isolating all the bodies and in this case all the threads in my part. If I want to have independent drawing views, I have to create a separate layer manually on putting everything on it what I want to see in this. So for this, I have an example in the second part of the webinar as well. Okay. Yeah, and there's a few documentation states that you see here. One is, well, for the notes, I create a dedicated layer per state and put everything on it that I want to see in the combined state, except the annotations because they are living in the combined state directly. And here's my exception, and this is about the kilts. And this is because the kilts are composed of one or multiple features like an extrude, a fill, a boundary, blend, a sweep, whatever, and combined by surface operations like a merge, a trim. And so you usually use a lot of features to create one kilt. And it's just insufficient to put only one of these surface features onto a layer and blank it, and blank the whole kilt. You still would see the kilt. You rather would have to put all the parent features onto layers, but this is a hard work to find this out, and it's a complete chaos. So I decided to add the kilt to the layer directly, but on the opposite, I had to make sure that none of these surface creating features is put to any layer, because otherwise the rule wouldn't fit in here for me. So I would be on different levels. Yeah, and this brings me to a little live demo on this. So let's open up just this part, for example. So yeah, very simple part, has two bodies. And just for explanation, when I open this up, I'm coming into the default all combined state. But if I open up the layers here, you see my saved layer state, model state is opened during retrieval. So very nice, very clean, only geometry, no supplemental geometry, nothing else. So I have already in here multiple combined states that I can switch between. If you have a look at the layer tree, you see this is switching to drawing right now. If I go to work, other layers get isolated. And finally, for example, this one isolates even more layers for me. So this is very simple, very easy to switch between these states. If you can prepare them, even better. So let's go in situation working. So in my working space, I'm now creating one or two, let's say two new datum planes for visibility purposes, just to make this visible. So I created those two, and the mechanism that took place right now, these two datum planes were automatically grabbed by this layer here. And as the layer is isolated, I see those datum planes. I still can switch between this and this, and it doesn't really matter. So it's knowing all this, so I don't have to blank, unblank, and so on. I just have to switch. Well, imagine this is a task that I have fulfilled now, and I want to clean up and start from the beginning doing another task. It's very simple for me. I'm using a prepared icon that's cleaning up the work automatic layer. Yeah, so it's just selecting, cleaning all the models, and with this, my datum planes disappear. And this is because they are also on this layer here, and this one is blanked. And as it's blanked and nothing else is isolated, then they're invisible. From the point of the user that says, well, I want to have one of these permanently visible in my working space, he can use little icon here, and I'm just opening up the layer properties, and I can say, okay, datum2 in the work environment, and here we go. In this case, DDM2 is on the work user, and if I clean up again, it's still there, so it doesn't impact the cleanup anymore. So if user don't want to see it anymore, he has to remove it from the layer manually. Yeah, that's very quickly how this works. And this brings me back to my presentation and to a little check of my requirements. Well, obviously I have less manual layer operations because I'm using rules all over. I can switch directly between visibility states. New items are visible and isolated items are visible, and it's very stable and reliable. If everybody in the company knows about these mechanisms, well, you can exchange parts, no problem. Retrieving models, I don't see supplemental geometry, anything else of it. It's just geometry in here. I see the new created features. And yeah, for my personal convenience, I created a few icons and map keys to support my workflows. So a lot of green check marks in here for this. And yeah, finally, a little bit of a summary. Yeah, well, layers are obviously the most universal and also complex technique to control the visibility of items. I encourage you to plan things up front if you're using this, and because it's paying off later. In the part 2 of this webinar, that's starting in a few minutes after I have a bottle of water, I'm showing a few real-world use cases, how this works in Creo and how the bodies do affect this visibility in there. Yeah, and I think this concludes the first part, and I'm giving back to with the last slide to my colleague Florin.
Thank you very much, Jan, for this very intensive, content-intensive presentation and very detailed presentation of the visibility strategy. As Jan said, we are going to have a second part of the webinar in a few minutes. And if you have also other questions besides those that will be answered in the second part, you can always contact Jan at this address you can see on the bottom. Thank you all very much, and see you in the second part.